Welcome to the debate. Today we're zeroing in on the current status and the trajectory of the rapidly escalating multi-front war in West Asia between the United States and Israeli military coalition and Iran. This analysis is drawn directly from the latest reports from the ground, tracking military operations, geopolitical maneuvers, and, well, the very real economic impacts over the first 4 days of this unprecedented conflict.
It's a complex picture, and frankly, the speed at which it's moving is just staggering.
Staggering is exactly the right word. The central question we are examining today is this: is the U.S. and Israeli coalition on the verge of a swift, decisive victory through overwhelming technological superiority and leadership decapitation? Or, conversely, are they walking into a protracted, economically devastating war of attrition where Iran's immense geography and asymmetric capabilities will ultimately prevail? I take the position that the U.S. and Israel have achieved overwhelming structural and tactical dominance. They've successfully decapitated Iran's leadership and neutralized its primary offensive capabilities, ensuring a rapid and decisive conclusion to the hostilities.
And I represent the opposing view. I argue that Iran's sheer geographic scale, its decentralized institutional power, and its profound ability to inflict catastrophic economic damage on global markets, well, they guarantee a prolonged, grueling conflict. This is a war that simply cannot be won from the air.
Let's jump right into the sheer scale of the coalition's opening maneuvers. From where I sit, these have been flawlessly executed and structurally devastating. We aren't just looking at a show of force here. We are looking at a level of systematic destruction that effectively prevents Iran from sustaining an organized war effort. I mean, within the first 48 hours alone, the United States military struck more than 1,250 targets.
The numbers are high, absolutely. No one is debating the volume.
High and incredibly precise. The U.S. Central Command systematically dismantled facilities belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. We're talking command and control centers, air defense systems, and anti-ship installations, all wiped off the board. But the true fatal blow was the decapitation of Iran's leadership. On Saturday morning, utilizing triangulated intelligence from the CIA and Mossad, a targeted Israeli strike hit a military compound in Tehran. In a single minute, that strike eliminated Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the defense minister, the armed forces chief, the IRGC chief, and 40 senior commanders. We are witnessing the total erasure of the adversary's command hierarchy.
Tactical execution is one thing, but tactical air superiority does not equal strategic victory, especially not in a country the size of Iran.
You don't think wiping out the top tier of leadership fundamentally changes their ability to fight?
I come at it from a different way. You have to look at the geographic and institutional reality. First, the geography. Iran spans 1.6 million square kilometers. To put that into perspective, it is more than 3 times the size of Iraq and more than twice the size of Afghanistan. It has sprawling deserts, mountain ranges, and rugged hills that provide immense strategic depth. Historically, airstrikes alone have consistently failed to achieve swift capitulation in regions with that kind of terrain, precisely because bombs can remove leadership, but they cannot occupy ground.
But they don't necessarily need to occupy the ground if the regime collapses from within. And that leadership vacuum is exactly what breaks the regime's institutional spine. Ali Khamenei was a man who dominated the country's religion and politics since 1989. And the coalition didn't just target the military. They actively engaged in the strategic dismantling of coercive institutions, specifically the internal police and intelligence networks.
But removing the head doesn't kill the body here.
It does when you also sever the central nervous system, which is what they did. By hitting the very forces that the regime uses to suppress internal dissent, the coalition is paving the way for internal collapse. We are already seeing footage of 2 different Irans playing out on camera. While some mourn, in many corners of the country there are celebrations. Crowds are literally dancing in the streets and toppling monuments built in Khamenei's honor. Without the cohesive force of its supreme leader, and critically, without the coercive power of its internal security apparatus, the regime's ability to maintain control over a deeply dissatisfied populace is evaporating in real time.
It's a compelling image, but Iran is not a dictatorship that collapses with the fall of one man. If we look at Venezuela, for instance, power lived in one place, at the very top. Iran's structure is entirely different. It is a hardened, ideological theocracy where power is distributed across multiple, rigid institutions. Within hours of Khamenei's death, what did we actually see?
A scramble for control.
No, we saw a highly organized transition of power. Ali Larijani, a key confidant and security chief, facilitated the immediate creation of a 3-member interim leadership council. That council includes President Pezeshkian, Judiciary Head Ijai, and a senior cleric from the Guardian Council. Furthermore, the ultimate decision on succession rests with the Assembly of Experts.
Which is an 88-member body of senior clerics, right?
Exactly. You've got 88 clerics whose entire constitutional purpose is to handle this exact succession scenario. And let's not forget the IRGC itself. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps isn't just the military branch. It is a massive parallel state structure that controls significant portions of Iran's economy, telecommunications, and infrastructure. It operates almost like a heavily armed corporate conglomerate. The idea that removing the top tier of leadership will cause this deeply entrenched state to organically dissolve ignores the institutional rigidity of the Iranian system.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Institutional rigidity cannot compensate for complete technological and aerial dominance. It doesn't matter how many clerics sit on a council if the skies above them are entirely controlled by the adversary. The United States and Israel are operating with an unprecedented technological edge that vastly outpaces any institutional response Iran can muster.
Technology is powerful, sure, but it has limits when stretched across 1.6 million square kilometers.
Let me give you an example of how that technology is actually being applied because it changes the whole paradigm of modern warfare. Let's look at how the intelligence for these opening strikes was processed. The U.S. Central Command utilized Anthropic's Claude AI platform to process vast amounts of battlefield intelligence. They used it to identify targets, map behavioral patterns of mobile missile units, and simulate complex battle scenarios. Data that previously took human analysts days to process was handled in hours. That is how the CIA tracked Khamenei's movements for months and pinpointed that exact Saturday meeting in Tehran.
The intelligence gathering is certainly advanced. No one is debating the precision of that specific strike.
But it extends to the wider operational front as well. Israel's systematic goal right now is to wipe out air defenses in western Iran, hitting radar installations and missile launchers to create a safe air corridor. They are essentially clearing a highway in the sky to operate freely over Tehran. And when Iran attempts to fire back, they are met with impenetrable layered defense systems. Look at the United Arab Emirates. They successfully intercepted 152 out of 165 Iranian ballistic missiles and over 500 drones. They utilized the combination of Patriot systems and U.S. THAAD batteries. For those tracking the military tech, THAAD is designed to shoot down short, medium, and intermediate-range ballistic missiles in their terminal phase, right before impact. That layered shield is what gives the coalition this massive technological edge. The asymmetry here is so vast that Iran's ability to wage war is being systematically suffocated.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You cannot intercept everything. And in asymmetric warfare, you don't need to hit every target to win. You just need to inflict enough economic and psychological pain to make the fight unendurable. Despite layered defenses and advanced artificial intelligence, Iran's sheer geographic size allows it to absorb massive damage, hide its assets, and keep firing.
But they are firing into an iron shield.
Not an impenetrable one. You mentioned the UAE's interception rates, 152 out of 165. That means 13 ballistic missiles got through. And the psychological and physical damage of what gets through is profound. Iran retains a stockpile of roughly 3,000 ballistic missiles. In these first 4 days, they have successfully struck luxury hotels in Dubai, including the Palm Jumeirah and the Burj Al Arab. They hit the Ali Al Salam Air Base in Kuwait, severely damaging the runway. They sparked a massive fire at the Ras Tanura complex in Saudi Arabia,
which is a significant oil facility.
It's one of the largest oil refining facilities in West Asia, with a capacity of 550,000 barrels per day. Hitting that sends a shockwave through global markets. And we must look at the casualty disparity, because this reveals a fundamental difference in military doctrine. The Red Crescent Society reports 700 people have died in Iran so far. In contrast, there have been 11 casualties in Israel and 5 across the Gulf.
Which illustrates the precision and dominance of the coalition strikes.
Or it proves a critical strategic point. Iran possesses the strategic depth and the ideological willingness to absorb immense casualties and infrastructural damage, including strikes near UNESCO sites like the Golestein Palace, while continuing to fire relentlessly. They don't have to win the air war. They just have to prove they can out-endure the technological supremacy you are describing by bleeding the region dry.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes the coalition is to engage in a symmetric war of endurance. They do not. The strategic objectives of the United States and Israel are highly specific and completely contained. This isn't nation building and it isn't an occupation. Donald Trump outlined 4 main objectives for this operation: destroying Iran's missile capabilities, weakening its navy, preventing it from developing a nuclear weapon, and curbing its support for regional militant groups.
But containing a war is historically nearly impossible once the missiles start flying across borders.
But the objectives are strictly enforced. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio explicitly clarified this. He stated that the primary mission is the destruction of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities and the threat posed by their navy to global shipping. He framed this as a necessary preemptive measure, noting the U.S. had clear intelligence that Iran was preparing to strike American forces, which would have resulted in much higher casualties if left unchecked.
But the spillover is happening right now.
The coalition is not attempting to put soldiers on the ground to occupy a country the size of Alaska. They are executing a surgical dismantling of the offensive assets that threaten the region and global stability. By destroying the naval assets that could blockade the Strait of Hormuz and the launchers required to fire those 3,000 ballistic missiles, the coalition achieves its strategic aims without getting bogged down in an endless ground war. They are removing the threat, not conquering the territory.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that the economic spillover is already uncontainable, which completely shatters the contained war theory? You mentioned securing global shipping, but look at the reality on the water today. The world's largest container shipping company, Maersk, has completely suspended its vessel crossings to the Strait of Hormuz due to safety concerns. Insurance firms are pulling back coverage or pricing it so high that ships simply won't sail.
Temporary disruptions are to be expected in the first week of any major operation.
This isn't just a disruption. It's a structural threat to the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz is a choke point handling 20% of the world's seaborne oil. If it is fully blocked, or if companies are just too terrified to use it, we are looking at a supply gap of 8 to 10 million barrels per day. The recent OPEC Plus announcement of increasing production by 206,000 barrels a day is a drop in the ocean compared to that deficit. And look at the aviation industry. The airspace over West Asia is virtually empty. Global flight hubs in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha have come to a standstill. This is the biggest disruption to global air travel since the COVID pandemic.
But again, the Gulf states have crisis management protocols for this exact scenario.
Protocols don't fix plummeting revenues. And who is bearing the brunt of this? The Gulf states. The UAE has summoned the Iranian ambassador, suspended its financial markets, and closed its embassy in Tehran. These nations have built their entire modern economies on stability, global trade, and tourism. As Iranian drones hit their civilian structures and airports, the internal pressure on these Gulf allies is skyrocketing. They are going to push Washington to back down before global energy markets and their own economies collapse. This is not just a military conflict. Iran has turned this into a global economic hostage situation. That is the essence of asymmetric leverage.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how these regional allies are actually responding. The economic disruptions are undeniably severe, yes, but we must contextualize them as temporary shocks typical of the opening phase of a major definitive military operation. The swift neutralization of Iran's capabilities is precisely what will restore that economic stability in the long run. The United Arab Emirates, for example, is demonstrating remarkable institutional maturity right now.
Institutional maturity doesn't stop a ballistic missile from hitting a hotel.
But their layered air defense systems are functioning at an extraordinarily high capacity, mitigating the vast majority of those threats. And their crisis management has ensured that businesses continue to operate, hotels remain active, and stranded visitors are accommodated despite the flight cancellations. The financial markets pausing is a standard precaution to prevent panic selling, not a sign of economic collapse. Furthermore, you mentioned pressure on Washington to back down, but the geopolitical reality suggests the exact opposite. Key regional players actually support this definitive action.
Privately, perhaps. But public support is fracturing.
Privately and strategically. Reports indicate that the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia actively lobbied the U.S. president to take military action against Iran. Saudi Arabia and Iran have fought devastating proxy wars across Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon for decades. From Riyadh's perspective, the decapitation of Tehran's ideological core and the systematic destruction of its proxy network is a massive strategic victory. And it's one achieved without Saudi Arabia having to fire a single missile or put their own forces directly in the line of fire. The alignment of U.S., Israeli, and Saudi interests here provides incredibly robust political cover to see these precise military objectives through to the end.
I agree that Saudi Arabia stands to gain strategically if Iran falls, but that political cover is fraying rapidly at the global level. This conflict is acting as a massive pressure test for the entire global order. China has strongly condemned the strikes as a violation of sovereignty, and Russia is diplomatically backing Tehran. Even traditional U.S. allies are drawing hard lines.
The UK, for instance.
Exactly. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer explicitly stated in the House of Commons that the United Kingdom was deliberately not involved in these initial strikes. He maintained that a negotiated settlement is the best path forward. The idea that this is a surgical, globally supported operation is simply not supported by the diplomatic reality. Additionally, you cannot dismiss the economic impact as a temporary shock when the fundamental mechanics of the conflict depend on endurance.
But Iran doesn't have the assets to endure.
They are actively hitting U.S. bases across the region right now. The Ali al-Salem Air Base in Kuwait, bases in Bahrain housing the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, and the Al-Assad base in Iraq. Washington has already confirmed the deaths of 3 American soldiers, with 5 others injured. If this conflict drags on and the price of oil spikes to $120 or $150 a barrel, driving global inflation and manufacturing costs through the roof, the domestic political pressure in the United States will become intolerable. That is the ticking clock Iran is relying on.
It is precisely because of those risks, the ticking clock you mentioned, that the coalition has acted with such overwhelming speed and destructive force. The technological integration we discussed earlier, using AI to manage the kill chain, is allowing the U.S. and Israel to operate at a tempo that Iran simply cannot match. It's not just about hitting static targets. Israeli jets are targeting mobile missile launchers in the west of Iran, blowing them up while they're actively being loaded. They are destroying Iranian jets right on the tarmac before they can even attempt takeoff. But a decentralized force doesn't need to coordinate at a high tempo to cause chaos. It does if it wants to sustain a coordinated war effort. This isn't a war of attrition where both sides are equally trading blows. This is a systematic dismantling of one side's ability to wage war. Iran's top leadership is gone, their air defenses are being obliterated, and they stand completely alone without direct kinetic military intervention from their allies like Russia, who is currently bogged down in Ukraine. The U.S. and Israel are breaking the chain of command faster than it can be reestablished.
And yet they are still firing. That is the absolute crux of the matter. The coalition may be breaking the central chain of command, but the decentralization of Iran's military apparatus means local commanders can and will continue to launch ballistic missiles and drone swarms from deep within their own territory. You mentioned they are alone, but Iran still has its proxy network.
A network that is also being heavily targeted.
Targeted but highly active. Hezbollah has fired a massive barrage of precision missiles and drones into northern Israel, and in response, Israel has had to divert resources to bomb 70 Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, further widening the conflict. The Iraqi Shia militias are also active, targeting U.S. assets. And we cannot forget the Houthis in Yemen, who have the potential to disrupt the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. If you combine disruptions in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait with the Strait of Hormuz, you completely sever maritime trade between Europe and the Indian Ocean. The coalition may have speed and technology on their side, but Iran has time, immense physical space, and a deep ideological willingness to suffer.
Let's pull back and look at where this leaves us, based on the evidence from these first 4 days. To summarize my position, in light of our discussion today, the reports clearly indicate that the United States and Israel are executing a highly precise, technologically dominant military campaign. By utilizing advanced AI for real-time intelligence processing and deploying overwhelming aerial firepower, they have successfully decapitated Iran's most senior leadership, including Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. They are rapidly achieving aerial superiority, blinding Iranian radar, and systematically dismantling the physical infrastructure required to launch missiles or blockade maritime trade. The sheer speed and structural damage inflicted have irrevocably broken Iran's command hierarchy. This is paving the way for a decisive shift in West Asia's power dynamics and the neutralization of a long-standing threat to global stability.
And to summarize my perspective, tactical airstrikes, no matter how precise or technologically advanced, simply cannot conquer a nation of 1.6 million square kilometers. Despite taking severe, undeniable losses to its leadership and military infrastructure, Iran retains an immensely resilient institutional structure designed exactly for this scenario. They maintain a vast, decentralized stockpile of ballistic missiles and unparalleled strategic depth. More importantly, they hold the ultimate asymmetric weapon, the ability to paralyze global energy markets and disrupt global aviation. The economic devastation currently rippling through the Gulf states, the shipping industry, and international markets guarantees that this will not be a swift surgical victory. Rather, it is shaping up to be a grueling, region-wide catastrophe that traps its adversaries in an unwinnable war of attrition.
It is a debate of immense complexity. We are fundamentally measuring the absolute limits of technological air supremacy against the harsh realities of geographic endurance and global economic fragility.
Exactly. The ultimate status of this war will clearly depend on whether precision military force can truly outpace economic attrition and institutional survival. There are critical, unfolding geopolitical shifts occurring within the material we've reviewed today that warrant our continued intense observation over the coming days and weeks.
We will leave it there for today, allowing you, the listener, to weigh the evidence and form your own conclusion on the current status of the war. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.